You were young and your heart was an open book. You used to say, live and let live. You know you did, you know you did, you know you did.
If the Republican presidential primaries were held on the internet, it's very likely that Republican Congressman Ron Paul would get the nomination. The name Ron Paul is the most searched term on the blogging website Technorati. His campaign website gets more hits by far than any other Republican candidate, and he has more friends than any other Republican candidate on the social networking website MySpace.
He says he's the only real Republican. Decide for yourself when you hear presidential candidate Ron Paul. He's a Republican who wants American forces out of Iraq. Did you hear what I said? Republican who wants forces out of Iraq. Ron Paul. I'm going to let you argue with the President of the United States because he held a news conference this week and he said some very important things that I get the feeling you're going to be very much against. We're going to start with what the President says when he's asked about whether it's time to start getting some of the troops out of there. Here's what the President says.
You're asking me how much longer. We have yet to even get all our troops in place.
Yet to even get our troops in place. How do you respond to that?
Well, that worries me because he's had how many years now to do that? 4 years to get them in place. 4 years to have a victory. That worries me. It worries me about the spread of this war into Iran. There's a lot of conditions there over there that could worsen. So that's why I'd like to get our troops out of harm's way. I didn't want them to go there in the first place. So I'm much more optimistic about what would happen. Look at the tremendous things that's happened with Vietnam since we left. Yes, there were a lot of problems, but they're a trading partner. We invest in them. Look at how we do with China. We didn't have to fight and kill Chinese. Of course, we tried to do that in Korea, but now we trade with China. We depend on them. They're our bankers. So I think a lot of good things could come of it. The biggest important thing is Americans wouldn't be killed any longer.
You sound like a pro forma 1930s isolationist.
No, I'm not an isolationist. I am a non-interventionist because the founders of this country that I listened to carefully were very much, they were not protectionists at all. They were free traders. They wanted trade and travel and friendship. In fact, that's your point. You say you're the true Republican when it comes to the Republican candidates. Right, and Robert Taft was an example that I use. He didn't want to be in NATO. And there was a strong element in this country that didn't want to go into World War I and World War II. Okay. Even the presidents advocated peace. We'll never take you to war in Europe. And I like that old saying, no, don't go to war in Europe and don't go to war in the Middle East. It's best for Americans to stay at home, mind our own business, become a wealthy, prosperous country, set a good example, and they'll want to emulate us. We can't force our ways on other people's to the point of a gun.
Well, but the impression that I got from what you were saying is that the U.S. Monitoring of the no-fly zones in Iraq for 10 years before the war, that was responsible for Al-Qaeda coming to the United States and blowing up the World Trade Center?
No, I said that was part of it. And part of it was the fact that we had troops in Saudi Arabia, which is considered Holy Land. And this is backed up by the 9/11 Commission report. So I think he needs to read that because that's policy. The CIA does not deny this. This is what they found when they went into deep investigation. So here he is, mayor of the city, and brags about all this security, and he hasn't even read the report. So I think he needs to read that report.
But you were saying specifically that the U.S. had been bombing Iraq for 10 years. You didn't mention the Saudi Arabian element last night.
Well, in 30 seconds, sometimes you don't get to do a full explanation, but that's what the case has been. Yes, we did bomb. I mean, how many times did Clinton bomb, and how many times did Bush bomb? And it was not infrequent. I'll bet you we didn't go 1 year where we didn't bomb. And besides, we had sanctions. They also cited sanctions where literally hundreds of thousands of people died from the sanctions, from loss of medicine and food due to our sanctions. I mean, if somebody did that to us, would we be angry? But that's my question.
I guess the bottom line question, though, is that a lot of viewers came away saying, here's Ron Paul, he's a Republican who wants to be president. He's blaming the United States, in effect, for 9/11. Yeah. I wonder if you want to if you want to revise that impression in any way.
No, they need to understand history. They need to understand that he's hiding behind patriotism, because what they're saying is I'm un-American because I'm challenging policy. I'm an American because I have a right and an obligation to challenge policy. If policy is detrimental and has blowback, then we should change it. But to say that we have to accept this policy without any question, I think is the wrong thing to do. And this is what they expect. And if you don't do it, they say, oh, you're blaming America. You're unpatriotic. And I think that's foolish. I think somebody that does not allow dissent and discussion and arguments about why this policy is good or bad, the American people, see, he wants to say, put words in my mouth and say that the American people caused this. I blame the American people. No, I blame bad policy, and bad policy can have consequences. Unintended, the CIA recognizes it, the 9/11 Commission recognized it. So to me, this sounds very logical. I think he needs to back down. I think he needs to read the report.
If you were president, what would you do about the Al-Qaeda threat? Forget about Iraq right now. The Al-Qaeda threat, Osama bin Laden, he's still on the loose. What would you do about that threat to the United States?
Well, I'd go after him. I voted for the authority. I wish they had done it. We voted for the money, and yet we ignored it. So this is my complaint, that we didn't do what we were supposed to do, and we went and started a war that we shouldn't have. And here we have Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. They have a nuclear weapon. They have a military dictatorship. They overthrew an elected government. And what do we do when they get nuclear weapons? Not following the NPT treaty? We reward them. We give them money. So I'm saying don't reward people who get nuclear weapons, and then they'll want to get them. That's why Saddam Hussein pretended he had one, because he thought if he had one, maybe we'd leave him alone. So it's natural for people like Iran, the leadership in Iran, to want to get a nuclear weapon, because we respect people that have power, and we disrespect people that we think we can run over them and run roughshod over their countries, invade them preemptively, and change their regime. I think it's a bad foreign policy. It's not Republican, it's not conservative, and it's not constitutional. I'm Ron Paul. I'm a congressman from Texas, serving in my 10th term. I am the champion of the Constitution. I'm suggesting very strongly that we should have a foreign policy of non-intervention. The weapons weren't there. Our national security was not threatened. We're more threatened now by staying. The sooner we come home, the better. It was a mistake to go, so it's a mistake to stay. If we made the wrong diagnosis, we should change the treatment. I tried very hard to solve this problem before we went to war by saying, declare war if you want to, go to war, fight it, and win it.
It's going to be a fun one. Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul will be joining us. Ron Paul! He's a sensation!
And there's a big difference between corporations who benefit from government largesse. That's corporatism, and that's evil.
Right.
You know, Halliburton and stuff.
No, I'm familiar with that.
The military-industrial complex.
No. I've heard some things.
But in 2002, I offered an amendment to international relations to declare war, up or down. But don't get into it for political reasons or to enforce UN resolutions or pretend the Iraqis were a national threat to us. We don't go to war like we did in Vietnam and Korea, because the wars never end.
Why are we determined to follow a foreign policy of empire building and preemption which is unbecoming of a constitutional republic? Special interests and the demented philosophy of conquest have driven most wars throughout all of history. Rarely has the cause of liberty, as it was in our own revolution, been the driving force.